I am Nova Blaire, 30 years old from Ohio. The sound of glass breaking split the silence of our living room. My husband, Ethan, stood across from me, his expression cold enough to make my stomach twist. "You'd be nothing without me, Nova," he said, his voice steady, cruelly calm. "Don't forget who made your life what it is." The champagne flute hit the marble floor with a sharp crack, scattering pieces across my bare feet. I stared down at it, watching the golden fizz spread across the white rug like spilled guilt. I wanted to say something. To deny it. To fight. But the words caught in my throat. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock, counting the seconds of my silence. Then he laughed softly, like I was the punchline to a joke. "Look at you," he said. "All that time pretending you had ideas, pretending you were something. The truth is, Nova, you wouldn't last a week without me." My voice came out smaller than I intended. "You don't mean that." He tilted his head, lips curling. "Oh, I do. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. I used to believe in him. When we met, he was ambitious, driven, charming. He said we were a team. He called me his muse, the creative half of his success. Back then, I thought partnership meant balance. But slowly the balance tipped until I was carrying everything but the credit. He told me to quit my job 2 years ago. "You don't need to work," he said. "I'll take care of you." I thought it was love. Now I knew better. It was control dressed as comfort. The TV was still on in the background, murmuring about stocks and business growth. His business, his name, all funded by the savings I'd built before him, back when I had dreams that belonged only to me. "Who are you calling?" he asked when I reached for my phone. "No one." He smirked. "Exactly. You don't have anyone. You've spent years in my world, Nova. You don't exist outside of it." That was the moment I realized he was right. Because he had made it so. He had slowly cut the strings that tied me to my old life. My best friend stopped calling after too many canceled plans. My parents lived hours away. I hadn't spoken to my sister in months. The realization didn't break me. It hardened me. "I want you out," I said, my voice trembling but steadying with every word. He laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "This house is mine. You couldn't survive a week without me." Something inside me shifted. "Watch me," I whispered. For the first time, his smirk faltered. Just for a second. Then he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. "You'll come crawling back," he said without turning around. "You always do." The door slammed. The echo lingered like smoke. I stood there, surrounded by everything I used to think meant success. The expensive rug, the designer couch, the cold emptiness of a house that wasn't a home. My reflection shimmered in the fragments of broken glass. It looked unfamiliar. My hands shook as I bent down to pick up the pieces. One by one, I dropped them into the trash, watching my old life cut away. By the time I threw the last shard, I wasn't shaking anymore. That night, I packed a single suitcase. I didn't take much, just some clothes, my laptop, and an old leather notebook from design school. It was filled with sketches of the fashion line I'd once dreamed of launching. Ethan used to laugh when he saw it. "Cute hobby," he'd say. "Not anymore." When the sun rose, I left the house quietly. I didn't look back. My new apartment downtown was small, with peeling paint and the faint smell of coffee from the cafe below. It was noisy, imperfect, alive. Everything my old life wasn't. I set up my laptop on a chipped wooden table and opened a blank document. For the first time in years, I felt both terrified and free. I created a new email, novablairedesigns@agmail.com. Then I opened my sketchbook and began to draw. At first, my hand trembled. The lines were uneven, but with each stroke, the rhythm returned. By afternoon, I had finished my first design, a logo, clean and simple. Nova Designs. I stared at it for a long time, tears burning behind my eyes. It wasn't just a logo, it was a declaration. That night, I lay on the mattress, exhaustion pressing down on me, but there was no fear, only resolve. Ethan's words echoed again. "You'd be nothing without me." I smiled in the dark. Then I'll be everything in spite of you. For the first time, I felt something stronger than love or hate. I felt purpose. The woman he said couldn't survive without him had just begun to live. The truth is, Ethan's cruelty didn't appear overnight. It grew quietly, like mold under perfect light. When Nova looked back on their years together, she could see every red flag clearly now. Each small injustice disguised as love. Each apology that was really a warning. In the beginning, he had been charming in all the right ways. He'd text her good morning before her alarm, send flowers to her office, and show up at her design exhibitions just to brag. That's my wife. It felt like a dream then. But dreams, she learned, had a habit of turning on you. It started with suggestions. Why don't you take a break from work? You're overworked. Then requests. You don't really need to go to that meeting, do you? I'll handle it. And eventually, orders. Stay home, Nova. You're better off out of the way. Each time she said yes, she lost a piece of herself. He had once promised her a studio space. A real one, with your name on the door. She had believed him. Instead, he turned that space into an office for his growing consulting firm, painting over her dreams with his logo. When she protested, he wrapped an arm around her and smiled. You'll thank me later. Art's not a career, babe, it's a hobby. Let me handle the real work. She laughed back then, uncomfortable but unwilling to argue. She'd grown up watching her parents fight over money. She thought peace was better than pride, but peace built on silence doesn't last. It cracks quietly before it shatters. Nova remembered the first time she realized she was trapped. It was the day she tried to buy a new sketch tablet. The card declined. Ethan, she said gently when he got home, there's a problem with our account. He didn't even look up from his phone. There's no problem. I moved the funds into the business account. You don't need to worry about that stuff. I needed it for work. Work? He looked up then, smiling, but his eyes weren't kind. What work, Nova? That night she cried in the shower so he wouldn't hear her. Months turned into years. She got used to asking for permission. Permission to see her parents. Permission to spend. Permission to breathe. Every decision had to pass through him first, like she was an employee waiting for approval. The world she'd built before him slowly disappeared. Her friends, her career, her confidence. Even the way she dressed changed. He preferred her classy, which meant quiet colors and modest lines, invisible enough not to distract. When people complimented her on social media, on her style, her smile, he would say, I taught her that. She let him. Because fighting back meant another argument, another night of cold silence. One night, her old college friend Lacey called. Nova, I haven't heard from you in months. How are you? Nova hesitated. Busy, she said. Busy doing what? Before she could answer, Ethan walked into the room. He looked at her phone, his brow tightening. Who's that? Lacey. He smiled, but there was a flicker of annoyance behind his eyes. Tell her you'll call her later. We're about to eat. When she didn't move fast enough, his voice sharpened. Now, Nova. She hung up, whispering an apology. That was the last time Lacey ever called. Her mother used to tell her, love isn't supposed to make you small. But Nova had convinced herself that patience was strength. That endurance was love. She started keeping a notebook again, tiny notes of things she couldn't say out loud. He moved the money again. Told me I looked tired when I smiled. Said I shouldn't wear red. It's too loud. She wrote these details down not as evidence, but as survival. Every sentence was a reminder that she wasn't crazy. Sometimes Ethan would still act like the man she fell for. He'd bring home dinner, kiss her forehead, tell her she was beautiful. But those moments always came after a storm, a way to reset the board so she'd play again. Once she asked him, Do you ever miss the old us? He looked at her like the question was naive. The old us didn't have money. I prefer this version. Nova forced a smile, but something inside her broke quietly that night. It wasn't the first crack, but it was the deepest. One afternoon, she visited the old cafe where she used to sketch. The owner, a gray-haired woman named June, recognized her instantly. Nova Blaire, June said warmly. You used to sit right there by the window with your sketchbook. What happened to you? Nova smiled faintly. Life. June poured her a cup of coffee and leaned in. Don't let life stop you from being yourself. The words lingered long after Nova left. She wrote them on the first page of her notebook when she got home. That night, she confronted Ethan, not with anger, but with exhaustion. I miss who I used to be. He didn't look up from his laptop. Then go find her, he said dryly. Just don't expect me to wait around. It should have hurt. Instead, it freed her. That was the first night she slept without crying. The first night she dreamed of color again. She didn't know it yet, but the years of silence were ending. The woman she'd buried under compromise was clawing her way back to the surface, stronger than ever. And the man who thought he'd broken her would soon learn what survival really looked like. I didn't realize how long I had been pretending until the day the pretending stopped working. For years, I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace meant keeping the marriage. But peace, I learned, can turn into a prison when only one person gets to define it. It was a Thursday. I remember because Ethan always left early on Thursdays for his networking nights, which usually meant dinners with clients I never met. I'd spent the morning cleaning because that's what he liked. Order. The house had to shine before he came home, like a stage before an audience. By evening, I was sitting at the dining table with my sketchbook open, drawing quietly under the warm light. It was one of the few things that still made me feel human. But when Ethan walked in, his face darkened. "What are you doing?" he asked, dropping his keys on the counter. "Sketching," I said softly. "It helps me relax." He looked down at the table, at the drawings of fabric patterns, lines, and ideas I'd started to fall in love with again. "I thought I told you to focus on the house, Nova. We've got dinner with the investors tomorrow, and you're doodling?" "It's not doodling," I whispered. "It's work. My work," he laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Work? You don't have a job. You have hobbies." The way he said it, dismissive, casual, lit something in me. I'd heard it before, but this time it landed differently. This time I didn't swallow it. I looked up at him, heart pounding. "Don't talk to me like that." His smile disappeared. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. I'm tired of being talked to like I don't matter." He stepped closer. "You're being dramatic. You wouldn't survive 5 minutes in my world, Nova. You can't even pay a bill without asking me." His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, every word designed to puncture. I felt that familiar ache rise in my chest, the instinct to apologize, to make things right. But I didn't move. I didn't say sorry. I met his eyes and said, "Then I guess it's time I learn." He stared at me for a long second, disbelief flickering into anger. "Don't start something you can't finish." He grabbed his coat and slammed the door. But this time I didn't cry. I sat at that table, staring at my sketches, realizing something had changed. The fear was still there, but it was smaller, like a shadow shrinking in the light. The next day, I made a decision. I called my sister for the first time in over a year. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Nova?" Her voice was cautious, surprised. "Are you okay?" I wanted to lie, to say yes, but the truth spilled out before I could stop it. "No, I'm not." There was a pause, then a sigh that sounded like forgiveness. "Then come home." Those 3 words cracked something open in me. I hadn't even realized how badly I needed to hear them. But I didn't go home, not yet. I wasn't ready to run, not until I knew I could stand. That evening, when Ethan returned, I didn't greet him at the door. I was at the kitchen table again, laptop open, applying for freelance design work. He stopped behind me, reading over my shoulder. "What's this?" "I'm getting back into design," I said calmly. "There's a startup looking for part-time remote artists." He leaned closer, his tone dripping with mockery. "You think someone's going to hire you after years of doing nothing? You're out of practice, out of your depth. I'll catch up," he scoffed. "Don't embarrass yourself." Something in me snapped. "Don't worry," I said, standing up. "You've already done that for both of us." He froze. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. It lasted only a second before he turned away, muttering, "You'll regret this." But I didn't. Not that night. Not ever again. Over the next few weeks, I started to rebuild my world in secret. I took small jobs designing logos for local boutiques and websites. The money wasn't much, but every payment that hit my new bank account felt like a victory. I worked quietly, late at night, after he went to sleep. Sometimes I'd hear his footsteps in the hallway and close my laptop fast, pretending to scroll through social media. It felt like living a double life. His obedient wife by day, my true self by night. The exhaustion was worth it. One evening, while sorting invoices for his business, I noticed a discrepancy. A payment had been rerouted to an account I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but when I checked again, I saw my name listed as a consultant. He was using my credentials to move money under a fake account. My blood ran cold. I confronted him that night. "Ethan, why is my name on one of your accounts?" I asked. He didn't even look up from his phone. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." He finally met my eyes, and for once he didn't bother pretending. "It's cleaner if I use your name on some things. Don't worry, it's legal." "It's fraud," I said, my voice trembling. He smiled thinly. "Not if no one finds out." And that was it, the breaking point. Not the insults, not the manipulation, but the realization that he was willing to drag me down with him if it meant saving himself. That night, I packed a second bag. This one wasn't for leaving quietly, it was for preparing. I gathered documents, receipts, emails, anything that tied me to his company. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was calculating. When I looked in the mirror before bed, I didn't see the woman he'd tried to erase. I saw someone new, someone dangerous. "I'm done," I whispered to my reflection. "You won't see me coming," and deep down, I knew I meant it, because the moment I stopped fearing Ethan Blaire was the moment he stopped winning. The days after the confrontation felt like walking through fog. I woke up each morning in the same house, under the same roof as Ethan, but something inside me had shifted permanently. The silence between us wasn't just cold, it was poisonous. He barely spoke to me now, except for clipped sentences about bills, appearances, and dinner reservations. But even his silence was strategic, meant to remind me that I was alone. Every time he walked past me, phone glued to his ear, talking to clients or investors, I could hear the unspoken words, "You need me." I stopped believing them. I started spending more time in the guest room. It had once been my studio before he turned it into storage space for his files. Now it was my sanctuary again. I cleared out boxes and set up my laptop on an old folding table. The Wi-Fi connection was weak there, but I didn't care. It was the only place where his presence couldn't suffocate me. That's where I spent my nights working, designing quietly, one logo at a time, one invoice at a time. Each small job I completed added a few dollars to the hidden account I'd opened. Each dollar meant freedom, even if it was still months away. But freedom wasn't easy to chase in a cage that looked like luxury. The isolation crept in slowly. My phone barely buzzed. Lacey, my old friend, had moved to another state. My parents called sometimes, but I kept the conversation short, smiling, lying, pretending everything was fine. It was easier than explaining the truth. How do you tell people you love that the person you married had turned your world into a performance? At night, when Ethan went out for work, I'd sit on the couch with my sketchbook in my lap, the TV muted. The silence would press against me until I could hear my own heartbeat. I hated that sound. It reminded me I was still here, still enduring. Once I tried calling my sister again. The call went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. There was a day, sometime in early winter, when I almost gave up. I had worked 3 design gigs in a row, late nights, barely sleeping, trying to meet deadlines. And when one client ghosted me without payment, I broke. I shut my laptop, laid my head on the desk, and sobbed. The house was empty. Ethan was away on business. My cries echoed in the room, raw and ugly. Then I noticed something, an old photo frame half buried in a drawer. It was from before him. The picture showed me, younger, hair messy, smiling in front of a small pop-up market with my handmade designs hanging on display. That woman had fire in her eyes. I touched the glass and whispered, "You're still in there. I promise I'll find you." That night I didn't sleep. I got back to work. The struggle wasn't just emotional. It was physical, too. My hands ached from hours of drawing. My eyes burned from screen glare. There were days when I barely ate, surviving on coffee and determination. I lost weight. I lost time. But I didn't lose focus. I told myself I was rebuilding one pixel at a time. The hardest part was pretending nothing had changed. When Ethan was home, I still had to smile, cook, act the role of the perfect wife. If he suspected how much time I was spending online, he'd take my laptop away. Once, he came into the room unexpectedly while I was sending out proposals. My heart nearly stopped. "What are you doing?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "Just reading," I lied, clicking the screen off. He studied me for a second longer, then shrugged and walked away. I didn't breathe again until I heard the shower running. A few weeks later, I got my first major freelance client, a small fashion boutique in Chicago. They wanted a full branding package and were willing to pay more than any of my previous clients. I worked nonstop for days, pouring every ounce of creativity I had left into it. When I finally delivered the designs, they loved them. The owner, a woman named Clara, emailed me personally. "You've got a real gift. I'd like to keep working with you long term." I cried when I read that email, not because of the money, but because someone finally saw me again. But the more I succeeded, the lonelier I felt. It was strange. Freedom didn't feel like joy yet. It felt like exhaustion. Every day I balanced two lives: the ghost of a wife he expected, and the woman I was rebuilding in secret. The guilt of lying to him mixed with the satisfaction of finally doing something for myself. One night, he came home early. I didn't hear the door. I was on a video call with a client when his voice cut through the room. "Who are you talking to?" I froze. The client on the screen looked startled. I quickly muted the call. "Just work," I said. He stepped closer, his jaw tight. "Work? Since when do you work?" "I told you I've been freelancing." He leaned over the table, eyes narrowing. "Using my Wi-Fi? In my house?" I stared at him, something inside me snapping in quiet defiance. "This isn't your house, Ethan, it's ours. Or have you forgotten that I helped pay for it before you took everything over?" His face hardened. "Careful, Nova. You don't want to start a fight you can't win." He turned and walked out, but I caught the faintest flicker of doubt in his eyes. For the first time, I saw him realize I wasn't afraid anymore. After that night, I stopped hiding. I didn't flaunt my work, but I didn't apologize for it either. I set up my schedule, took more clients, and grew bolder with each passing day. There were still moments when doubt crept in, when I questioned whether I was strong enough, whether I was making a mistake. But every time I opened my sketchbook, the answer came quietly through the lines I drew. Keep going. The struggle was far from over, but for the first time, I wasn't surviving for him. I was surviving for me. And that, I realized, was the first real victory. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains like it hadn't in years. For once, it didn't feel like another day of pretending. It felt like the start of something real. I opened my laptop and looked at my growing list of completed projects. Each logo, each design, was proof that I wasn't the fragile woman Ethan wanted me to be. I was building again, quietly, piece by piece. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what he'd say. I was too focused on what I could do. It began small. I started replying to messages from clients in public spaces, cafes, parks, anywhere that wasn't within his walls. I began attending virtual meetings without muting myself when he walked by. It was liberating, the sound of my own voice carrying confidence again. I even started updating my online portfolio. I uploaded my new designs under a pseudonym, Blaire. It was safer that way. I wasn't ready for Ethan to find out yet, but I wanted the world to know that I existed beyond him. A week later, an unexpected email arrived. Your portfolio caught our attention. We're launching a collaborative campaign for emerging female designers. Are you interested? My pulse quickened. The email came from a well-known fashion tech startup based in Chicago. I reread it twice before whispering, "They noticed me." For years, Ethan's voice had drowned out my own. Now someone else was hearing me instead. I told no one. I accepted the invitation quietly and started working on the project under the radar. Every evening, While Ethan talked on business calls or scrolled through his phone, I'd sit with my headphones on, sketching late into the night. One evening, he glanced at me. "You've been on that laptop a lot lately. What's going on?" I looked up calmly. "I'm working," he frowned. "On what?" "Designs," he chuckled. "Still clinging to that fantasy?" I didn't respond. I just smiled slightly and said, "You'll see." It was the first time I didn't try to justify myself. I could see the confusion flicker across his face before he turned away. That small silence, the one I controlled, felt like victory. The project deadline came fast. I submitted my work the night before the review, heart pounding as I hit send. I didn't expect much. After years of being told I wasn't good enough, hope was fragile. But 2 days later, my inbox exploded. "Congratulations, Nova. You've been selected as one of our top 3 designers. We'd love to feature your work in our national showcase next month." I covered my mouth, tears blurring the screen. They had used my full name this time. Not Mrs. Blaire, just Nova. That single word felt like a rebirth. The more I worked, the stronger I felt. The woman who used to tiptoe around her husband's moods was gone. I woke up earlier, slept less, but every second felt alive. I'd catch my reflection in the mirror sometimes, and barely recognize the fire in my own eyes. But power changes things. And Ethan noticed. One evening, he found one of my invoices in the printer tray. "What's this?" he asked sharply, waving the paper. I met his gaze. "My work. You're getting paid for this?" "Yes." He stared at the number on the page, jaw tightening. "You're using my resources for your little side project?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm using mine. The skills you said were worthless." His voice rose. "You're embarrassing me, Nova. What if people think I can't provide for my wife?" I took a slow breath and said the words I'd been holding for years. "Maybe they'll think your wife finally stopped waiting for permission." He didn't respond. He left the room, slamming the door behind him. I sat there trembling, but not from fear, adrenaline, because I had finally stood up to him, and the world didn't end. Days later, I got another email, this time from the company's PR team. They wanted me to speak on a virtual panel for women in business. I hesitated before saying yes. I wasn't ready for public attention, but something inside me knew it was time. The event was scheduled for a Thursday evening, the same night Ethan usually left for his networking dinners. Perfect. When the day came, I put on my best blouse and set up the camera in the guest room. As I introduced myself to the panel, something magical happened. The words flowed. I wasn't the scared woman hiding behind her husband's shadow anymore. I was Nova Blaire, designer, survivor, creator. For 30 minutes, I spoke about resilience and rediscovering purpose. I could see other women nodding, their faces lighting up as if they understood. When the session ended, my inbox filled with messages of support. "You inspired me. Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone." I closed my laptop and smiled. I had spent years believing I was powerless. Now my story was empowering others. When Ethan came home that night, I was sitting on the couch with my sketchbook. "How was your evening?" I asked. He glanced at me suspiciously. "Fine, why?" "No reason," I said, hiding the small, knowing smile tugging at my lips. Because for once, I had secrets that didn't involve shame. They involved strength. The next morning, I received another message. The Chicago company wanted to fly me out for their main event. They were offering to cover all expenses, and wanted to officially announce a partnership with Nova Blaire Designs. I sat frozen, staring at the screen. It wasn't just success, it was validation. I whispered to myself, "This is it. This is the start." I didn't tell Ethan, not yet. Some victories need silence to grow. That night, as I packed my laptop bag, I caught my reflection in the mirror again. I saw the woman I used to be, the one who believed, who created, who dreamed. But now she looked different. Sharper, stronger, unbreakable. I smiled and said softly, "He said I'd be nothing without him. Let's show him how wrong he was." And with that, I turned off the light. The discovery of my power wasn't loud. It was quiet, deliberate, unstoppable. The kind of power that doesn't need permission. It just is. Every plan begins in silence. For me, silence had been a prison once, but now it was my weapon. By the time winter gave way to spring, I had already made my choice. I would leave Ethan, but not empty-handed. Not broken. I would walk out stronger, freer, and with something to show for every scar he'd ever left. Leaving a man like Ethan required precision. He wasn't just controlling. He was calculating, possessive, and suspicious of change. If he even sensed I was planning something, he'd shut me down before I could breathe. So I smiled. I played the part. And while he thought I was still the obedient wife he'd trained me to be, I was laying the groundwork for my escape. I started by securing my finances. Every time I got paid from a design project, I transferred half into a new account under my maiden name, Nova Cross. It was the name I'd left behind when I married him, but now it felt like home again. The other half stayed in the joint account to keep him from noticing anything unusual. Next came the evidence, the part of my plan that terrified me most. I began documenting everything: emails, bank statements, conversations I could record without his knowledge. I knew what he'd done with my name, the false consultant accounts, the fake transfers. If I was going to protect myself, I needed proof. I bought a small external hard drive, disguised as a compact mirror, and saved everything there. It became my secret weapon, small enough to fit in my purse, powerful enough to dismantle his empire. There were close calls. Once, he came home earlier than usual and found me on the phone with Clara from the Chicago project. My heart nearly stopped when he walked in. "Who's that?" he asked, tone sharp. "Just a client asking about color palettes," I said, forcing a smile. He frowned. "You sound nervous." "I'm just tired." He studied me for a moment before nodding. "Don't overwork yourself. It's not like it matters anyway." I kept my expression neutral until he left the room. The moment he was gone, I pressed my hand over my chest, feeling my heart slam against my ribs. I was playing with fire, and I knew it. But I was done living cold. Clara's company soon announced the Chicago showcase, and they wanted me there in person. It would be the biggest moment of my career, the kind of event that could change everything. The only problem? Ethan never let me travel alone. I crafted a plan that took weeks to perfect. I told him Clara had invited us both to a networking gala in Chicago for his business. His eyes lit up instantly. His ego had always been my most predictable ally. When he agreed to go, I smiled politely, hiding the rush of triumph that burned inside me. He thought he was walking into another night of cocktails and handshakes. I knew it would be the night everything changed. The week before the trip, I met quietly with a lawyer downtown. Her name was Alyssa Patel. Sharp, calm, the kind of woman who could smell a lie before it left your lips. I'd found her through Clara's recommendation, someone used to dealing with financial and domestic abuse cases. We met in a small cafe, my hands shaking around my coffee cup. "I need to get out," I told her. "But I can't let him know until I'm gone." Alyssa nodded slowly. "You're smart to plan ahead. You have evidence?" I slid the mirror-shaped hard drive across the table. "Everything." She connected it to her laptop, scanning the files silently. When she looked up, her expression had shifted, half shock, half admiration. "You've been living with this?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Then here's what we'll do," she said, her voice turning firm. "Once you're in Chicago, we'll file your separation and freeze your identity under your maiden name. He won't be able to access your credit, your accounts, or anything tied to you. By the time he realizes you're gone, the papers will already be in motion." For the first time in years, I felt something that resembled safety. The night before the trip, I packed my suitcase quietly. I included my laptop, sketches, and the hard drive. Everything that represented who I was and who I was becoming. Ethan noticed me folding my best blazer. "You're really taking this seriously," he said with a grin. "I want to make a good impression," I replied lightly. He wrapped his arms around me, his tone smug. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Everyone there will know who the real success is." I smiled against his shoulder, already picturing the look on his face when that illusion shattered. The morning we left, I felt calm, unnaturally calm, like the stillness before a storm. The drive to the airport was quiet. He scrolled through his phone while I stared out the window, replaying every step of my plan in my mind. There was no turning back now. When the plane touched down in Chicago, my phone buzzed. A message from Alyssa. Everything is ready. The papers will be filed tonight. You're free the moment you say the word. I turned off my screen, my hand trembling slightly. Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy rehearsing his fake charm for the evening. The gala was grand. Crystal chandeliers, music, the buzz of ambition. Ethan thrived in crowds like these. He shook hands, bragged about deals, and introduced me as his creative consultant. He loved taking credit for things he didn't build. But tonight, the tables were turning. When the event host took the stage to announce the featured designer, Ethan was halfway through another glass of champagne. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host said, "please welcome our guest of honor, Nova Blaire, founder of Nova Designs." Ethan's hand froze mid-air. The applause roared around us as I stepped onto the stage, my name echoing through the room like a promise kept. I didn't look at him when our eyes met. I didn't need to. I already knew what he saw, someone he couldn't control anymore. That night, I walked off the stage into a new life. While Ethan tried to process the betrayal he thought he'd never face, Alyssa filed the documents back in Ohio. My accounts were secured. My identity was free, and me? I wasn't just leaving him, I was leaving the version of myself he created. The setup was complete. The strike was next. The applause thundered in my ears like music I'd been waiting a lifetime to hear. My name, Nova Blaire, echoed through the grand ballroom, clear and untouchable. The lights were blinding, cameras flashing, people smiling as they clapped for me, not for Ethan, not for Mrs. Blaire, but for me. When I stepped off that stage, my heels clicked against the marble floor like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence I'd spent years writing in silence. Ethan didn't move. He just stared at me from across the room, the smile on his face frozen, brittle. He looked like a man who'd just watched the ground vanish beneath his feet. I could feel his eyes burning holes in me as reporters surrounded the stage, asking for quotes and photos. But I didn't flinch. I smiled for the cameras and said the one line I'd rehearsed in my head for months. Success doesn't belong to those who take. It belongs to those who create. When the crowd began to thin, I walked toward him. His jaw was tight, his champagne glass untouched. "What the hell was that?" he hissed under his breath. "That," I said evenly, "was my work. My name, my success." "You used our name," he spat. I tilted my head. "Our name stopped meaning anything the day you used mine for fraud." His face went pale. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," I said, leaning closer. "And so does my lawyer." For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Fear. I left him standing there while I mingled with other designers and executives, pretending to sip champagne. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from Alyssa. "It's done. He's locked out. Bank accounts frozen. His fraudulent files are under investigation." My fingers trembled as I typed back. "Thank you." Then I turned and looked at Ethan across the room, still trying to smile at people who were now congratulating me. He didn't know it yet, but by the time the night ended, his empire would start crumbling. By midnight, the gala was winding down. I slipped out early, careful not to draw attention. I had one more thing to do. Outside, the Chicago air was cold and sharp, but I barely felt it. I called Alyssa. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said quietly. "It's better than okay," she hesitated. "You did it, Nova. You actually did it. Are you sure you're ready for what comes next?" I looked back at the glowing hotel behind me, the reflection of chandeliers sparkling against the glass. I've been ready for years. Ethan confronted me in our suite later that night. The door slammed so hard the frame shook. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he shouted. "Yes," I said, unzipping my gown and hanging it neatly on a chair. "I've reclaimed my life." He paced like a caged animal. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You made me look like some accessory." I met his glare. "Now you know how it feels." He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous calm. You think you can survive this? Everything you have, the car, the house, the business, it's tied to me. I smiled faintly. Not anymore, he frowned. What do you mean? You'll find out tomorrow, I said, when you check your accounts. For a split second, he looked confused. Then realization dawned. His face twisted. I warned you, I interrupted. You built everything on lies, Ethan. And you built some of it on my name. Now the truth belongs to me. He lunged forward, voice rising. You'll regret this. I didn't flinch. I already regret staying this long. I slept peacefully that night for the first time in years. By morning, Ethan's empire was cracking. His company email was suspended, his accounts frozen, his so-called business partners pulling out one by one. The financial fraud investigation had officially begun, with the documentation I'd gathered as evidence. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just watched quietly from my laptop as the dominoes fell. When he called, I let it ring. When he texted, I didn't read. And when his lawyer tried to contact mine, Alyssa simply said, My client has no comment. For the first time, I had the power, and I didn't need to use it to hurt him. I just needed to stop letting him use it to hurt me. 2 days later, I received a call from the Chicago company's director. Nova, she said, her voice glowing with excitement. Your designs are going viral. Every publication wants to feature your story. You've inspired so many women already. I smiled softly. Thank you. We'd love to offer you a full-time creative director position, she added. I paused, feeling the world tilt into focus. I'd love that. When I returned to Ohio a week later, I didn't go home. I went to the new studio space I'd rented downtown. The walls were white. The air smelled of paint and coffee, and light poured in through the tall windows. On the glass door, I placed the new decal myself. Nova Designs. The reflection of my name shimmered in the sunlight. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began drafting a press release. Not about revenge, about rebirth. After years of silence, I finally chose to create the life I wanted instead of waiting for permission to live it. That was my statement. That was my truth. A week later, I saw Ethan's face on the local news. He was being questioned about his business's suspicious activity. He looked smaller on the screen, stripped of his arrogance. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just turned off the TV and whispered, "It's over." Because revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about closure. And I had finally found mine. That night, as I sat in my studio with the city lights twinkling outside, I wrote the first line of my next collection. For every woman who was told she'd be nothing without him. This one's for you. The strike was complete. The revenge wasn't rage. It was resurrection. The world has a way of finding out the truth, especially when you stop hiding it. By the time spring turned to summer, my story was no longer a secret whispered between friends. It was a headline. Ohio designer exposes husband's fraud. Launches empowerment brand. The first article appeared online 2 weeks after the Chicago Gala. I hadn't spoken publicly about Ethan's crimes, but the investigation spoke loudly enough. Reporters found the trail of deceit he'd left behind, and now the world was following it straight to his doorstep. I was sitting in my new studio when Clara burst through the door, her phone in hand. "Nova, you've gone viral!" she shouted. I blinked. "What?" She turned the screen toward me. There I was, on the homepage of a major fashion site, smiling on the stage in Chicago. Below my photo, bold text read, "From control to creativity, Nova Blaire's unbreakable rise." I scrolled through the article, my throat tightening. They'd written about my designs, my advocacy for women in business, and, delicately, about the abusive relationship I'd escaped. Clara's eyes glimmered. "They're calling you the face of freedom, Nova. This is huge." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I had dreamed of being recognized for my work, not my pain. But somehow, the two had fused into something powerful. My story was no longer just mine. It was a spark for others. Meanwhile, Ethan's empire was imploding. His company's board had suspended him pending investigation. Clients were pulling out. Investors were demanding refunds. I didn't need to dig for updates. They found me. News notifications buzzed every few hours. Local. Entrepreneur faces allegations of financial misconduct. Former partner alleges identity theft in marriage. Every article painted the same picture. A man who built his empire on deceit. Alyssa called one morning with a tone that was equal parts satisfaction and professionalism. "It's over," she said. "The authorities have enough to proceed with formal charges. You'll receive confirmation soon." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you," she hesitated. "How do you feel?" I looked around my studio. Sketches pinned to the walls, fabrics folded neatly on the table, the morning sun catching the gold lettering of Nova Designs on the door. "Free," I said simply. "I feel free." But freedom wasn't just about being away from him. It was about stepping fully into myself. When the Chicago company invited me back to headline their next event, I agreed immediately. This time, I wasn't hiding. The night of the event, I wore a gown I designed myself, deep emerald silk that shimmered like strength. As I stood backstage, I caught sight of my reflection and smiled. This was the woman Ethan tried to erase, and she had come back stronger. When I took the stage, the applause felt different. It wasn't just admiration, it was recognition. I spoke not just about art, but about reclaiming one's voice. "When someone tries to silence you," I said into the microphone, "remember that silence is only power if you choose when to use it." The room went still. I saw women in the audience nodding, eyes glistening. The moment didn't need to be loud, it just needed to be true. Later that week, Ethan called me for the first time since everything fell apart. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Nova," his voice cracked. "They're freezing everything. I have nothing left." I closed my eyes. "You had everything once, Ethan. You just didn't know how to keep it." He sighed, a sound between anger and regret. "I didn't think you'd actually do it." "I didn't think I would either," I admitted softly. "But you gave me no choice." Silence hung between us. Then he said bitterly, "You ruined me." I took a breath. "No, Ethan, you ruined yourself. I just stopped saving you." I hung up before he could respond. Days turned into weeks, and my story kept spreading. I started receiving letters from women across the country, artists, mothers, survivors, each one telling me how my story had given them courage. One letter stood out. "You don't know me, but your story made me leave the man who told me I was worthless. I walked out last night. I'm terrified, but I'm free," I cried when I read it, because that's when I realized. My revenge had evolved into something bigger than me. It wasn't about punishing Ethan anymore. It was about showing others that freedom was possible. By autumn, Nova Designs had its first fashion line, the Phoenix Collection. Each piece represented transformation, soft fabrics layered with bold lines, every seam stitched with defiance and grace. When the collection launched, the same publications that once called me the betrayed wife now called me the visionary designer. It was poetic. Poetic in the way life rarely is, but sometimes dares to be when you fight hard enough. One evening, I returned to my studio late and found a small envelope slipped under the door. No name, just my address. Inside was a note in Ethan's handwriting. "You won. I hope you're happy." I stared at the paper for a long time before folding it and tossing it into the trash. I wasn't happy because I'd won. I was happy because I'd finally stopped playing his game. The next day, I stood before my team, 6 women who had joined my brand because they believed in what it stood for. "From now on," I told them, "we build a future that doesn't need revenge to exist, just courage." They applauded, some with tears in their eyes. And I knew then that this, not revenge, not headlines, was the real victory. That night, as I watched the city lights flicker outside my window, I whispered to myself, "You said I'd be nothing without you. But now, you're the one fading into nothing." The reckoning wasn't just his downfall, it was my awakening. The noise of the world eventually faded. Reporters stopped calling, the court dates passed, and Ethan's name became just another forgotten scandal buried under fresher news. But mine stayed. Nova Blaire, the designer who turned pain into power, the woman who built beauty out of betrayal. Still, when the noise faded, silence returned. And that silence, for a while, terrified me. Because when you've lived in constant battle, peace can feel unfamiliar. It can even feel wrong. The first few weeks after the final verdict were quiet. Ethan was found guilty of multiple counts of fraud and given a suspended sentence with restitution payments. It wasn't the kind of punishment I'd imagined in my darkest moments. But it was justice, and that was enough. Alyssa called me the morning after the sentencing. "It's officially over," she said. "He can't contact you, can't touch your assets, and his business license is revoked." I closed my eyes, breathing in that word. Over. But healing doesn't start the day your abuser loses. It starts the day you realize you've stopped thinking about them. That day didn't come immediately. It came slowly, in pieces, in mornings when I woke up without fear, in afternoons spent designing without flinching at the sound of a phone vibration. I had scars, but they were mine now. One rainy evening, months after everything ended, I visited my old neighborhood, the small apartment building I'd moved into when I first met Ethan. The street was the same, but I wasn't. I stood outside, umbrella in hand, watching the raindrops slide down the building's windows. Somewhere in that brick facade was the girl I used to be, the one who believed that love meant endurance, that silence meant peace. I whispered to her softly. "You made it out." Then I walked away. Back at the studio, my team was preparing for another show, this one international. "We're taking the Phoenix collection to Milan," Clara announced one morning, her smile brighter than the sunlight spilling through the windows. The others cheered, and I felt it, that surge of joy that once seemed impossible. But amid the celebration, I felt a tug in my chest. Success was sweet, yes, but it wasn't the revenge I thought it would be. The real victory was waking up every day and choosing myself, even on the days it still hurt. Later that afternoon, I sat alone at my desk, sketching designs for the new line. Each curve of fabric, each bold pattern, was like a fragment of my story reborn. One of the dresses had intricate stitching that crossed over the chest, delicate but firm, like mended flesh. I titled it The Scar. When Clara saw it, she said, "It's beautiful, Nova, but it feels personal." "It is," I replied. "It's what healing looks like." Weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of my life settled into something calm, something mine. I hosted workshops for young designers, especially women who'd been told their dreams were unrealistic. During one session, a girl named Mia asked, "How do you move on from someone who broke you?" I looked at her, barely 20, eyes wide and unsure, and smiled softly. "You don't move on," I said. "You move through, and when you come out the other side, you realize you were never broken. You were just being reshaped." She nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just healing. I was helping others find their way through. One evening, as I was locking up the studio, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. For a heartbeat, I froze. Then I answered. A quiet male voice spoke on the other end. "Nova, it's Ethan." I said nothing. "I'm not calling to fight," he continued quickly. "I just wanted to say, I saw the article about your brand. You're doing well." I kept my tone even. "I am," he exhaled heavily. "I've been in therapy. They told me to make amends. I know sorry doesn't mean much, but I'm sorry for everything." I stared out at the city lights flickering beyond the glass. "I don't need your apology," I said softly. "But I hope you mean it, for your sake." He didn't reply. The line went quiet, and I ended the call. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just stood there breathing, because that moment, that calm, was proof of how far I'd come. The next morning, I walked into my studio early, before anyone else arrived. The sunlight streamed through the windows, warm and forgiving. On the table was a sample piece from the new collection, a flowing white gown embroidered with silver threads. I traced my fingers over it, remembering how much I used to associate white with fragility. Now it meant freedom, I whispered to the empty room. You said I'd be nothing without you. But look at me now. I'm everything I was meant to be. And for the first time, I truly believed it. That night, I stood on the rooftop of my apartment building, watching the city hum below. The air was cool, the stars faint but steady. My life wasn't perfect. My scars hadn't vanished, but they'd stopped bleeding. They'd become part of my strength. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without the pain. I thought about the women who'd written to me, about the lives that might be different, because I spoke up. And I realized that my story, messy, painful, beautiful, had become something bigger than me. The morning of the Milan show began with sunlight spilling across the hotel room floor, soft and golden. Nova stood before the mirror, fastening the final button on her tailored white blazer. Her reflection stared back, calm, grounded, unrecognizable from the woman she once was. She breathed in deeply. No more running, no more proving. Today wasn't about revenge, success, or survival. Today was about peace. Backstage at the fashion hall, her team buzzed with nervous excitement. Rows of models stood ready, dressed in shimmering fabrics that told silent stories. Strength, renewal, freedom. The Phoenix collection had evolved since its first launch, but its heartbeat was still the same. Clara rushed over, headset tilted. Nova, the press wants a final quote before the show starts. Do you want to say something? Nova smiled, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Yes, tell them this. When you stop needing permission to exist, you finally start living. Clara's grin widened. That's perfect. Nova turned to the runway entrance, her pulse steady. Somewhere out there were hundreds of people waiting to see her vision, her truth, unfold. When the first model stepped onto the runway, the audience fell silent. The lights glowed warm gold as the music began, a slow, steady rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Every dress that followed was a chapter of Nova's story. The first, black angular lines and rigid cuts, the era of control. The next, red, sharp, and alive, the moment of defiance. And finally, the closing gown, pure white with silver threads woven like scars across the chest. The scar. When the final model turned at the end of the runway, the audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the hall, echoing in Nova's chest. She walked out then, not timidly, not hesitantly, but with the quiet strength of a woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes. After the show, journalists crowded around her, cameras flashing. Nova, what inspired this collection? One asked. She smiled softly. Life, pain, healing. It's about finding beauty after breaking. Another reporter leaned in. Do you have any regrets about how things ended with your ex-husband? Nova paused for a heartbeat. No, she said finally, because if I hadn't lost everything, I never would have found myself. Her answer spread through the room like light, not bitter, not triumphant, just true. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Later that night, after the celebration ended, Nova returned to her hotel suite. The city lights of Milan glimmered outside her window like stars caught in glass. She removed her shoes, poured herself a glass of wine, and sank into the couch. The TV played softly in the background, a recap of the show. Headlines flashing, Nova Blaire redefines resilience. The Phoenix rises again, a designer's triumph. She smiled faintly, not out of pride, but gratitude. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Melissa. Congratulations, Nova. You've built something extraordinary. Nova typed back, I finally built it for me. In the quiet that followed, she wandered to the balcony. The cool night air wrapped around her shoulders as she looked out over the city. There was a time when she thought closure meant confrontation, that she'd need to see Ethan broken, begging, ruined. But now she understood that closure wasn't something you got from another person. It was something you gave yourself, she whispered into the night. I forgive you, not for you, but for me. The words floated into the dark, carried away by the wind. The next morning, she visited a small cafe near the Duomo before her flight home. The barista recognized her from the news and shyly handed her a napkin with a note scribbled in broken English. "You make strong women believe again." Nova smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "Grazie," she whispered. That single moment, more than the fame, more than the applause, felt like the real reward. Her pain had found purpose. Back in Ohio weeks later, her studio had transformed. The once small space now thrived with color, creativity, and laughter. Young designers came in daily, some timid, others bold, all inspired by the same idea, to create freely, without fear. One afternoon, Nova hosted an open workshop. She stood before a group of aspiring women, their notebooks open, eyes shining. "Design," she told them, "isn't just about fabric or shape. It's about story. Every stitch carries who you are, and no one gets to decide what that means except you." A girl raised her hand timidly. "Miss Blaire, how do you know when you've healed?" Nova smiled softly. "When your scars stop defining you and start reminding you." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking deep. That night, after everyone left, she stood alone in the studio. The setting sun painted everything in gold. She looked around at the walls covered in sketches, the mannequins dressed in hope, the sewing machines humming softly. This was her sanctuary. Her proof that beauty could grow from ruin. On her desk lay the final piece she'd designed for the next collection, a simple silk scarf embroidered with her favorite phrase in silver thread. "I am enough." She folded it gently, set it aside, and turned off the lights. As she stepped outside, the streetlights flickered on, the evening alive with distant sounds. She inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air fill her lungs. There was no bitterness left, no shadow trailing behind her. Just peace and possibility. Nova Blaire had lost everything once, but she'd rebuilt herself with her own hands. And now, as she walked down that quiet street, she didn't look back. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find yourself again. What would you do if someone tried to break your spirit? Would you fight back or rise above?